I found myself when I arrived in the classroom becoming very quickly a sort of teacher that I never envisaged that I would be, and I was because I found it so awkward and difficult and stressful and frustrating, all the things that I was experiencing. I was showing a side of me to the children that I don't think they found very easy to relate to.
I didn't have any control over what was happening, so I would show up to class, and they teach you lots of techniques when you start becoming a teacher. One of them is a hand clap that you do to get children to respond. So the idea is that they will stop talking and clap with you until you get silence. And I would stand at the front of the room clapping and nobody would clap back. Or they suggest that you wait for silence. So I would stand and wait for silence, and I'd keep waiting and nothing would happen. So it was very chaotic, not very conducive to learning. And I didn't really know what to do to make that learning happen. It was after I started to use the program that things became so much calmer. It was about being able to anticipate those emotional upsets that might be contributing to the chaos and figuring out a way of communicating with the class in a way that would get through to them. Something that wasn't just about me having authority, because I really felt when I became a teacher that I should be the figure of authority. And a lot of people told me, don't smile until Christmas. But actually, it was only when I started smiling that things became easier and calmer, more serene. And now when you come into my classroom, the kids settle down very well. They know why they're there. They're very purposeful in their learning. So it is completely different.
I think the nurturing program really taught me how to sort of build that trust up with the children, and it's amazing how much more you get out of them once that relationship is established. You can see it with the children that I'm still working with, that there's still a bit further to go, but the ones that I have now really secured it with, it's amazing the difference in terms of self-esteem and things like that as well, because they now let me in a bit more and I can, keep on working with it. So it's a kind of virtuous circle now that it's started, that I've got a bit of trust. I'm able to exploit it more and more in terms of making them have a positive self-image of themselves.
I was very dictatorial. And I would stand at the front of the room and expect children to listen to me, and things were quite unpleasant. It wasn't the kind of culture that I wanted. And it was after I did the program that I felt it brought me back to being the kind of person I was, or that I felt that I was. It made me feel like I could be myself again in the classroom, and I could connect with that idea of the kind of teacher I wanted to be.
When you walk around a school and you see something happening, it's almost like you don't need to think about it anymore. Something happens, and almost the training is just sort of automatic in my brain. It's no longer now choosing what I need to do. I just know, I'm going to do that. And straight away in my head, I know what tone of voice to use and how I'm going to address the child and come down to their level. And we did work on empathy phrases and things like that, and they're just getting more and more ingrained into my psyche now. So it's not even a case of thinking I have to apply the training. It's just all becoming part of, me as a teacher, which is fantastic.
Until I started really being able to manage behaviour and keep things on an even keel in the classroom, no learning really happened. So it was only after I started to put those strategies in place that actually we could settle down and have a calm enough environment for us to do any learning to begin with. So I think really it was the springboard for all of the achievement that came later.
They now know how to learn, and also because the relationships between the children are getting better, I can employ more exciting teaching strategies now. There's a lot more sort of peer work and things like that, which at the start of the year, I had a really fractured class that didn't really like each other particularly. And bit by bit, by feeding in these techniques and building the relationships, I've now got a class that it worked nicely together, and there is still, there is still certain problematic areas I need to keep on working on, but just overall there's a sense that the children can help each other with their learning, and they know what to do if they get frustrated with a situation or something happens outside school, how we deal with it when we get into class?
At the beginning of the year, my class, the levels in the class ranged from sub-level 1B to 5C, but by the end of the year, everybody in the class had achieved level 4 or above, and everybody had made 2 or more sub-levels of progress. So it was quite a dramatic increase in attainment.
I could see the difference in myself after the training. I knew that I approached things in a different light, and you're never going to take away from the fact that especially when you start out in teaching, that it's a very difficult time, but it just completely, it gave me a new way of looking at things that calmed me down and made me a much better teacher and made me really enjoy my teaching. I had a lot more fun with teaching. And the best thing about teaching is the relationships that you build with the children. And if you're doing something that's frustrating those relationships, you need to get rid of it, and getting rid of that and then building those relationships. I mean, I've been lucky enough to be with my class for 2 years now applying these strategies, but I just absolutely love the relationship that I have with them, and we have great times together, and that's all part of this sort of ongoing building that's happened. So yeah, I have a lot more fun as a teacher now than I did at the beginning.
I think that a lot of things work hand in hand, but I think the nurturing program is the key driver for a lot of the emotional literacy that happens in my classroom. So the way the kids talk to each other, the way they talk to me, the way they apply themselves to their learning, because they've become much more self-reflective. They think now about where they're going and what they want to achieve and the best way to do that. So actually it gives them an extra level of maturity that I think they didn't really have before we started using the program. Because the program affects the children in their personal lives and the way they conduct themselves, they bring that with them into the playground, and that starts to have an effect on the other children as well. So I'm not sure that you can pinpoint it directly to those children, but you can see the impact, the ripple effect that it's having on the other children and on the community of the school.
Yeah, you can see it in terms of how the children sometimes respond to a situation. I think they still sometimes need to clock me as a reminder of how we do things, but you know, something happens and something annoys them, and whereas before that might have been a trigger for like a big explosion that then disrupted the lesson for a few minutes whilst the issue was dealt with, I can almost now non-verbally kind of just remind them how we do things in this class, and they're like, next time, would you mind not doing, you know, there's a different way of talking in the class.
They started to talk to each other in the language that I used. So part of the nurturing program involved scripts and learning ways to speak to children in a way that would develop their emotional skills and communication skills. So they started to speak back the language to me that I used with them. And then I heard them using it amongst themselves as well. So that was the biggest change, I think, the way they spoke to each other. Much more kindly, much more caring.
I thought I'd be a natural at it, and I think that's what I found so hard. And as a result, I was very, very stressed, and I found it quite difficult to know how to, you know, I couldn't really see the light at the end of the tunnel. And for the first time, the nurturing program made me realise that I start the day and bit by bit I'm giving things to other people, and I could end the day completely drained, and I needed to think about myself, because I could be no use to the children until I started focusing on myself a little bit more. I think I was so focused on making sure that they always had the best lessons, the best this, and giving myself a hard time for all the things I did wrong, remembering at the end of the day that I was no use to them if I was an exhausted, tired, worn-out teacher who then it was easier to become angry and everything else with them. And it just gave me, it just shifted my perspective, and I suddenly thought, no, I haven't got this quite right. I need to come back, and I think we all made a pledge at the end of our training session, and it was a silly thing, but you know, I just made sure that at the end of every day I had me time, and it wasn't about the children, it wasn't about stressing about anything else. It was about building me back up again so that I was ready for the next day, and it really just, it re-energised me.
I don't feel as guilty about taking time out. I have my own time in the day now, which I didn't really have before. I think I was so worried that if I gave myself any time and wasn't thinking about work and how to raise levels of achievement, that somehow I'd be failing. But it turned out that it was the other way around. I guess it's a genuine feeling because we really have benefited from it, and it really has been the key thing that's made a difference in our classroom out of everything that we've done so far.
I cannot think of a single training course, event, anything that I did in last year that affected and impacted my teaching, my well-being, the well-being of my children, the learning, and that's after all what it's all about, the learning in the classroom, as the nurturing programme.
I found that of all of the training that I had, it was the most effective and the most beneficial for my students. And I think for the community as well, because when you start to talk to students about emotional literacy, they then bring that home into their community as well. So it does have a far-reaching extension, I guess.
Instantaneously after that first training programme, it recast the way that I thought about things. It helped the well-being of the children in my classroom, helped my own personal well-being. Suddenly I was re-energised and positive about the things that I could do. It wasn't just a training that was waffly and yes, here's behaviour. They really focused on key things that I could pull out of the training and deliver in my classroom the next day. And I think that's a real plus point of the training.
I had an observer come in to visit me last September, and she visited again in January after I'd started using the programme, and she thought I had changed class. She thought I had a bunch of new children. She didn't realise it was the same group of children that I'd been teaching before.
I know it when I walk into my classroom that you can see the difference, but it's not just me. If you talk to my head teacher, the step change that she saw at the point when I'd engaged in the training was substantial. I had a classroom that there was learning going on, but it was very limited and it was in pockets, to suddenly a classroom where learning was going on by every child because there was an understanding and there were relationships being built and all sorts of wonderful things as a result of it's quite a wide approach that the training programme gave me, but there were lots of different ways in which I could implement it, which all together bolstered to creating this great learning environment and a happy class. And I don't think you can ask for better than a class that's happy and learning.